What if a single product could bring an entire empire to its knees? What if a global superpower deliberately flooded another civilization with addiction, not by accident, but by design? In the 19th century, this wasn't fiction. It was reality. A powerful empire, Britain found itself desperate to fix a growing economic problem. Its solution would change the fate of another ancient civilization forever: China, the weapon. Not guns, not armies, but opium. And what followed would lead to war, humiliation, and the beginning of what China would later call its century of humiliation. At the dawn of the 18th century, China under the Qing Dynasty stood as one of the most powerful and self-sufficient empires in the world. Its economy was vast, its population immense, and its cultural influence unmatched across East Asia. European nations were fascinated by Chinese goods. Tea, silk, and porcelain were not just commodities, but symbols of wealth and refinement. Demand for these products exploded in Europe, particularly in Britain, but there was one problem. China wanted almost nothing in return. Trade was tightly controlled through the Canton system, limiting foreign merchants to a single port and imposing strict regulations. Payments had to be made in silver, creating a massive trade imbalance. For Britain, this imbalance became a growing crisis. Silver was flowing out of its economy at an alarming rate. And so, Britain began searching for a solution that would have devastating consequences. The answer came from another part of the British Empire, India. Under the control of the British East India Company, vast regions of India were used to cultivate opium, a highly addictive narcotic derived from poppy plants. Opium was not new to China. It had been used in small quantities for medicinal purposes. But what Britain introduced was something entirely different: mass production, large-scale smuggling, and a deliberate strategy to create dependency. British traders began illegally exporting opium into China, exchanging it for silver. That silver was then used to purchase Chinese goods, effectively reversing the trade imbalance. It worked, but at a terrible cost. As opium spread across Chinese society, addiction rates soared. Officials, soldiers, scholars, even members of the imperial administration fell victim to its grip. The very foundation of Chinese society began to weaken, and the Qing government could no longer ignore the crisis. In 1839, the Qing emperor took decisive action. He appointed Lin Zexu, a determined and incorruptible official, to end the opium trade once and for all. Lin Zexu moved quickly. He confiscated over 20,000 chests of opium from foreign traders and ordered their destruction in a dramatic public display. He also wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, appealing to morality. How could Britain justify poisoning another nation's people? But his message went unanswered. To Britain, this was not a moral issue, it was an economic one. And the destruction of opium was seen not as justice, but as an attack on British trade. In 1839, tensions erupted into the First Opium War. The conflict exposed a brutal reality. China, once a dominant global power, was technologically outmatched by Britain's industrial military. British steamships, advanced cannons, and disciplined naval forces overwhelmed Chinese defenses with shocking ease. Cities fell, ports were seized. The Qing military, despite its size, struggled against modern warfare. This was not just a war, it was a demonstration of power, and China was losing. In 1842, China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking, marking the end of the war. The terms were devastating. China ceded Hong Kong to Britain. Multiple ports were open to foreign trade. Massive reparations were imposed. And most importantly, China lost control over its own trade policies. This treaty became the first of many unequal treaties, signaling a dramatic shift in global power. China was no longer in control. The story did not end there. In 1856, conflict erupted again in the Second Opium War, with Britain and now France demanding even greater access to China. The result was even more devastating. Foreign troops marched into Beijing. The imperial summer palace was looted and burned, a cultural catastrophe that symbolized China's helplessness. Opium trade was fully legalized. The very substance that had weakened China was now officially forced upon it. The consequences of the opium trade went far beyond economics. Addiction spread across all levels of society, weakening productivity, governance, and military effectiveness. Corruption increased. Social structures eroded. Public trust in the Qing government began to collapse. The psychological impact was just as profound. For the first time in centuries, China faced a harsh reality. It was no longer the dominant power it believed itself to be. This realization would shape its future for generations. The Opium Wars were not just conflicts over trade. They were a turning point in global history, a moment when economic ambition, addiction, and imperial power collided. For Britain, it was a victory that secured trade dominance. For China, it marked the beginning of a long period of struggle, reform, and eventual resurgence. Even today, the legacy of these events influences how China views the world and how it remembers its past. Because the story of opium is not just about drugs. It is about power. And the price nations are willing to make others pay to maintain it.